Hello and welcome wherever you may be in the Hotel Paradis. Some of the later parts of this piece by Bartok sound Islamic, but if you imagine the Islamic world, all these people performing the Salat and listening to the Quran, are these people really being a part of Gurdjieff duty? Or are they not just under another kind of hypnosis? Is that kind of following God? Is that really what being part of Gurdjieff duty is? And many religions speak like that, and yet outside, all the small creatures are working very hard. Maybe we have completely lost the sense and meaning of our own hard work. But I heard this piece and a couple of others by Mozart on a weekend in Brighton. There was an orchestra, about 40 strings. I was sitting 5 or 6 meters away from the stage. They were professional musicians, highly trained, and I was watching them thinking, is there really a problem with the world? Is there really a need for Gurdjieff's teaching? I mean, after all, these people are very intelligent, are they? They've trained themselves, they've studied, they've become proficient. Where's the problem? And yet, outside, their civilization, Western civilization, is collapsing, the streets are filthy, and inside, if you look carefully, the orchestra is almost all women these days, and the audience mostly of a certain Brighton persuasion. If there is something wrong, it seems to be hard to see. Let's hear from Ouspensky speaking to his students. How long does an eye last? Asked somebody. It is impossible to say. Every thought, every desire, and every sensation says I, and having said it, it disappears into the background. And what makes everything still more confusing, it's that these ephemeral eyes don't know each other. A man decides in the evening to reform his habits and to get up earlier in the morning. But the eye that wakes up next day knows nothing about any such plan and has no intention of rising any earlier than usual. Aren't any of them connected? All of them are in some way connected, but we don't usually know the connections. What then gives us the impression we are permanent and one? Asked a rather thoughtful man with a grave and intelligent face. The fact that we have a body and a name. The body changes, but so slowly that we are not aware of its changing. We go through life bearing always the same name. These two possessions of ours produce an illusion of unity and permanence, but this is only one of the many false ideas we have about ourselves. What are the others? Asked the same questioner. A man also prides himself on being self-conscious, whereas even a short course of self-study will reveal the fact that one is very rarely aware of oneself, and then only for a few fleeting moments. Man believes that he has will, that he can do. But this is also untrue. Everything happens to us in the same way that changes in the weather happens. Just as it rains, it snows, it clears up, and it is fine. So also within us. It likes or it does not like. It is pleased or it is distressed. We are machines set in motion by external influences, by impressions reaching us from the outside world. Having delivered himself of this chilly message, Ouspensky looked at his audience and smiled. Then he asked whether anybody would like to comment on this. A heavy silence brooded over the room. There was nothing revolutionary for me in what Ouspensky had said, but he had expressed the idea of the automatism of man in a rather novel way. I had always accepted the possibility that man had no free will, and that he was at the mercy of his desires and emotions. I had always pictured him as a definite entity that was pulled this way and that by its changing movements. But Mr. Ouspensky had gone much further than this. He had denied that there was anything in man stable or persistent enough to have moods. According to him, man was only a sequence of dissolving views, a procession of isolated thoughts, sensations, perceptions, and emotions. He was a chain of events, of inner responses to impressions reaching him from the outside world. Even that was not entirely new, for Hume had said something very like it. The silence in the room was becoming more and more uncomfortable, so oppressive that I was forced to break it. Isn't this the idea that man is only a machine, the same as the behaviorist school of psychology? Ouspensky looked at me. For them, he said, it is only a convenient theory which they fail to apply to themselves and to their own mental constructions. They see automation in others, but not in themselves. For us, it has got to become something far more real than this. Unless we realize with our whole being that we do not possess unity, consciousness, and will, we will make no attempt to acquire them. If we accept what you tell us, began someone. But Ouspensky interrupted him. Accept nothing. Faith is not wanted here. Submit everything you hear from me to a personal test, to the test of self-observation. Find out whether it is true that you have no permanent and controlling self. Find out whether you can do things in a different way from that in which you have always done them. And when you have made your experiments, report your results. To accept something on trust when you can prove it or disprove it is laziness. Make your own experiments, and when you are in any doubt about them, ask questions. What about art? Asked a lady with a very sensitive face. I can believe what you say is true of most of our activities. I mean that they are mechanical, but art is an activity of man's spirit, and his spirit is free. In speaking of art, I'm referring, of course, to the work of the great masters, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and so on. They also were machines, he replied. Very fine machines, no doubt, but machines. There is such a thing as conscious and objective art, but we do not know it. All the art that we know is mechanical and subjective, even that of the old masters. Well, look, it's obvious to me now that the very rich white Europeans who had fallen away from Catholicism in 1600 and were very rich, they walked around in tuxedos, they promenaded in parks, and all that kind of stuff. And they sat in these meetings and they were dramatic. Ouspensky filled the room with a brooding mood and smiled. He was vain. And he's not really correct about what he says if we look at the details. Though, of course, there is value in Ouspensky. Yes, there is value in what he says, but seriously, how the hell would you know how to use the toilet? How would you be able to get into bed at the end of the day if there wasn't something permanent inside you that remembered it? Of course there's something that remembers it. It's your subconscious. Your head, yeah, it's full of nonsense, and the person who's speaking is mostly speaking from that nonsense as well, And the whole problem with these people is that they don't have a realized teacher. They are democratic, they are part of the democracy where we're all going to have our self-help books, and we can do it ourselves. I will check myself. I will do my own self-remembering. I will do my old self-observation because, hey, don't bother having faith. Don't bother with any of that religious shit. Come and stay with me. We can be free. Far away from that horrible Roman Catholic Church. This whole mentality that you wouldn't actually learn from somebody who knows is so infected inside of European people these days. When I was in London, I had psychotherapy for 8 years. It was in a big centre called the CCPE, which is in Little Venice and Maida Vale. I used to go there every Thursday after work, And I got to know quite a few people who were having therapy there, and nearly all of them were on a course to become a psychotherapist before they had therapy, before they had fixed their problems, before they even understood what it was. First you learn how to teach, and then maybe later on you'll do it yourself. The mentality of these people is hard for me to understand. And that's, by the way, the reason I never became a therapist. Clearly, there is something of high development inside these musicians, Of course there is. There's something wrong inside of them. They're not completely false. They're not completely false. Something has been developed, but basically their mind or the third story is not connected to their real self, and neither do they have any books that explain the situation. They simply don't have any books. And if somebody starts talking about the Catholic Church, where the Catholic Church is full of octaves and trinities and all sorts of things like that, the last time somebody knew what that meant must have been 2,000 years ago. Today they do it, yes, it's fine, but they're very far away from knowing what it is. And by the way, Pentecost, it's that 50 days after Easter. And originally it comes from Judaism. They have an exactly analogous thing that they call the Omer, which is 7 weeks of 7 days where they do some special Jewish prayers, plus 1 day at the end, 50 days. And out of complete boredom, I looked up some texts of Jewish religious practice to see exactly what they tell each other, what they actually do over there in Jewish land. And it seems that their knowledge is also quite lost. For instance, if you look at these two pictures of those 50 days that they do the counting of the Omer, you can see the colours. They don't know where to put the colours. They put them in different places. They no longer understand the meaning of colour as it relates to the octave. And you'll see the first 3 days are called Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet, which translated into English means good, restraint, harmony. But if you look at the translations of the Jews, they're getting progressively more and more confused. Anyway, this week I was quite interested in the idea that nature would take revenge on all the foolish human beings who think that they are beyond the law, or that there is no law, or that they have to invent their own laws because they don't see the law actually occurring. And it says this in the Gospels. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to where he was baptizing, he said to them, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming wrath? Produce fruit in keeping with repentance, and do not think you can say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father.' I tell you that out of these stones God can raise up children for Abraham. And the axe is already at the root of the tree, and every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." And for my own part, I do plan to continue studying, learning and practicing. Knowledge, practice, knowledge like that, and I don't mean the normal kind of practice either. And that's our responsibility. I mean, surely you can look outside and see the birds working their balls off all day long and be ashamed, really. And I had this picture of like a rat in a cage and sort of giving it puzzles, and then the sort of rat has to kind of work its way through the next puzzle. And I say that because we have a slight distance from our machinery, from our bodies. Yeah, we can sort of delay things, we can go on holiday, we can decide not to work, we can do many things. And in this way, our machine becomes rusty. But the fact of the matter is that if you want to spiritualize yourself, if you want to actually, survive death with a body and all the rest of it, you're going to have to develop your machine to an extremely high level. The only way to do that is with extreme levels of being part of control duty. There's no other way. You can forget about self-remembering and observing yourself. If it hasn't worked in 70 years, it's not going to work. It's only a small part of the teaching. And so you have to learn ways of developing the body and giving yourself tasks and doing them and real stuff. Back on the subject of revenge, let's hear from Beelzebub, okay? It goes without saying, God forgives everything. This has even become a law in the world. But his creatures, men, in this case, should not abuse his all-gracious and everywhere penetrating goodness. It is their duty not only to watch over all that he has created, but also to maintain it. Yet here on earth men have even divided beings of all other forms into clean and unclean. Tell me, what guided them when they made this division? Why, for instance, is a sheep clean and a lion unclean? Are they not equally beings? This also was invented by men. But why this invention? Why this distinction? Simply because the sheep is a weak being and moreover stupid, and they can do just what they like with it. But men call the lion unclean only because they dare not do what they like with it. The lion is cleverer and above all stronger than they are. Not only will the lion not allow himself to be destroyed, it will not even let people come near it. And if anyone should venture too close, this Mr. Lion could give him such a crack in the noddle that our hero's life would fly away to regions concerning which the less said the better. I repeat, our lion is unclean simply because men are afraid of it. It is 100 times stronger than they are, 100 times superior. A sheep is clean because it is much weaker than they, and, as I said before, much more stupid. Every being, according to its nature and the gradation of reason attained by its ancestors, and transmitted by heredity, occupies a definite place among beings of other forms. To clarify what I have just said, a good example is the difference between the presence, already definitively crystallized, of the psyche of your Mr. Dog and Mrs. Cat. You have only to pet your dog a little and get it used to anything you please, and it will become affectionate and obedient to the point of abasement. It will follow you around and cut every sort of caper just to please you. You can take liberties with it, beat it, and be thoroughly mean to it. It will never turn on you, but only grovel still more at your feet. But try this sort of thing on your cat. Do you think it will respond to these indignities as your dog did, and cut the same humble capers for your amusement? Never in this world. Even if the cat is not strong enough to retaliate at once, it will never forget how you treated it, and sooner or later it will get its revenge. There are stories of cats that have pounced on a man while he slept and bitten his throat, and I can well believe it, knowing what the cat's reasons may have been. No, the cat will stand up for himself. It knows its value, and it is proud, and this is simply because it is a cat, and its nature is at that gradation of reason which belongs to it according to the merits of its ancestors. In any case, no being, not even a man, should be angry with a cat for this. Is it the cat's fault that it is a cat, and that owing to the merits of its ancestors its presence occupies the gradation of self-consciousness? A cat must not be despised for this, nor beaten, nor humiliated. On the contrary, it should be given its due as occupying a higher rung on the ladder of evolution of self-consciousness. By the way, my dear Hussein, on this subject of the mutual relations of beings, a famous former prophet of the planet, Disagronskred, namely the great Ahunilo, now the assistant of the chief investigator of the whole universe for matters of objective morality, once said, "If a being is higher than you in reason, you should bow before him and try to imitate him in everything. But if he is lower than you should be just towards him. For you once occupied the same place, according to the sacred scale of reason of our Creator and our all-maintainer." Personally, I like dogs and cats, to be honest with you. Okay, let's do one more. This one is from the Gospels, where the Mr. Jesus starts talking about the Mr. Beelzebub. Then a demon-possessed man who was blind and mute was brought to Jesus, and he healed the man so that he could speak and see. The crowds were astounded and asked, "Could this be the son of David?" But when the Pharisees heard this, they said, "Only by Beelzebub, the prince of demons, does this man drive out demons." Knowing their thoughts, Jesus said to them, "Every kingdom divided against itself will be laid waste, and every city or household divided against itself will not stand. If Satan drives out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then can his kingdom stand? And if I drive out demons by Beelzebub, by whom do your sons drive them out? So then they will be your judges. But if I drive out demons by the Spirit of God, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. Or again, how can anyone enter a strong man's house and steal his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man? Then he can plunder his house. He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters." He seems to be saying at the end there that he is part of a stream, and you are either in the stream or you are not, and the stream gathers its own. And that what can do is what is godly. But it is also said that Beelzebub was one of the creatures that regulated the regions of hell. And it is very difficult to regulate things down there. And a very dynamic understanding is required. Much greater so than to, regulate the kingdoms which are higher up and which have naturally more order. Anyway, what we think the world is doesn't really count. Something is happening inside. That's what counts. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. A few people who are interested in this material, please call again.